Do you ever miss the days where you would get handheld spin-offs of your favorite series back in the 2000s and early 2010s? I certainly do, and God of War Chains of Olympus is the exact kind of game that made this era of handheld gaming as awesome as it was. My name is St. Corvus, and this is my review of God of War Chains of Olympus. I've been a fan of the God of War series for quite some time now, but I can't say that I've ever been able to call myself a super fan or even anything close to it. I remember back in the day when PlayStation 2 games were sold in stores, I would spend countless hours checking out the aisles and really looking over God of War 1 and 2 while my mother did her shopping, but it wouldn't be until the HD collection dropped on the PS3 that I would finally get hands on and finally see what the series was about. While I've now played those first two games more times than I can remember, and even already done reviews of both titles on this very channel, I've never actually played and finished any other title in the series up until now. You see, I did get that HD collection, but I never managed to get my hands on the second HD collection for PS3, which contained the two PSP titles, God of War Chains of Olympus and God of War Ghost of Sparta, and as such, I never played any subsequent games in the series. That's right, the game that we are taking a look at today is actually a PSP title, a handheld entry in the God of War series that gave players a way to be able to take the biggest rager of a protagonist in gaming and be able to kill hordes of enemies in bed, on the bus, or on long car trips. Since this game was developed by former Daxter developers Ready at Dawn, rather than Sony Santa Monica who developed the mainline titles, let's take a look at the game and see whether or not the first handheld entry lives up to its series legacy. Chains of Olympus here may have come out after the release of God of War 2, but it does not pick up from where that game left off in Kratos' saga and is actually a prequel to the series, taking place several years before God of War 1, in a time where Kratos was still in service to the gods of Olympus. I like the direction they've gone here with the timeline, considering that this is a handheld title that a decent amount of the series players may never experience. It makes sense to set the game at a period of time that has already passed, rather than making it a crucial part to the continuation of the series. We get to see a slightly younger Kratos in this entry, one who is still hopeful and slightly naive to the way of the gods, and is frustrated but not full of fury at them yet. Shortly after saving the city of Attica from a Persian attack, a calamitous event destroys the city as the Sun Chariot and Temple of Helios crash into the earth after he goes missing. Kratos discovers that the city of Marathon is now under attack by the black fog of the god Morpheus, and must find a way to bring Helios back to stop the fog from taking over the land. For once we get to see Kratos doing things to save the gods, and try to keep balance rather than the rampage to destroy balance that we are so familiar with, but the story still manages to fully feel like a true God of War story. One aspect of the story that I personally quite enjoyed was that we got to see and feel a little more of who Kratos is and how he feels towards certain things. Don't worry, I'm not going to spoil any of the events or plots that occur past the intro of the game, but I like that we get to see his inner struggle and some of the things that haunt him enough to lead him down the path he takes in the mainline titles. I always felt like while yes, God of War 1 did tell his origin of how he came to be who he is, we could have always used a little bit more fleshing out of how he feels about those events, and while we don't see Kratos sitting at a therapy session crying about his lost family, I'll take a little bit of something here as opposed to nothing at all. When it comes to the story, I did actually enjoy it more than I thought I would for a handheld spin-off entry, but don't expect it to be anywhere near as grandiose as God of War 1 or 2. While the first game did keep things fairly basic, God of War 2 really amped up the storytelling aspect of the series by upping the scale and the amount of story on offer, and while Chains of Olympus does not disappoint, it still does not come close to how epic or large the story of the previous games felt. Speaking of scaling things down for a handheld entry, how does the gameplay hold up when you take this action-packed series and squash it down onto a PSP, with a few less buttons to play with? The honest answer is that Ready at Dawn has done a phenomenal job with the gameplay here, and I have very few complaints in this regard. A lot of PSP or Nintendo DS entries in long-running series had to have their gameplay quite heavily modified or changed to a different genre entirely to be able to make it work for the system, like Resistance Retribution or Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars. This was not done for God of War Chains of Olympus at all. Here we have a fully fledged entry that plays nearly identically to its main series entries, aside from some minor changes to its button layout. You'll be doing your regular God of War activities in this game, fighting enemies with your light and heavy attacks and combos, grabs, jumps, blocking and countering, and running around exploring areas and solving puzzles. Since you have no right analog stick on the PSP to dodge like you do in the main series, dodging has been remapped to holding both L and R and moving the nub pad in whichever direction you wish to dodge. If this sounds a little cumbersome, that's because it is, but the developers seem like they knew that, so there's actually less attacks overall that require strict dodging to get out of the way of, and I feel like enemies are telegraphing these moves just a little bit longer to allow players to get their fingers into the right positions. You still have some magic abilities you'll get as the game goes on too, but instead of switching them to whichever one you want with the D-pad, you just hold R and then use a face button for each, which, I'll be honest, actually felt a little bit more intuitive to me than the way that God of War 1 and 2 did it. You'll still be getting your red orbs for killing enemies, as well as green and blue ones to restore your health and magic, and you'll use your red orbs to upgrade the power and moveset of both your melee weapons and your magic skills. In true fashion, chests that you find will also contain Gorgon Eyes, which can be collected to upgrade health, and Phoenix Feathers, which will upgrade your magic. Only you'll have to collect 5 of each for a bar increase rather than the 6 required per upgrade in the previous games. I found the treasure chests containing these to be incredibly easy to find throughout my playthrough, and had each of these bars maxed out around 2/3 of the way through my playthrough, as well as having every single weapon and magic at max level before beating the game. You see, there's 2 small caveats when it comes to the gameplay of God of War Chains of Olympus. The first is that the game is incredibly short. This was my first ever playthrough of the game, and I wasn't just playing it like a regular game, I was streaming it at my Twitch channel, meaning that I was stopping to goof off and talk to the chat, and my playthrough still came to a total time of 4 hours and 50 minutes. I was expecting the game to be short, but not quite that short. The other caveat with the gameplay is that God of War Chains of Olympus is an incredibly easy game. In my entire playthrough, I think I only actually died twice, once from being turned to stone and insta-killed, and once in the final boss because I thought my game was glitching and I was testing out the controls to see if it was. Aside from that, I cannot name a single room in the game that actually gave me any challenge. I know that it is a handheld game with a small screen, but regular enemies were dropping so many green orbs to replenish health that I never found myself running too low, and leveling up your melee weapons to max level makes enemies die so quickly that they never get a chance to make you struggle. The game does feature 2 higher difficulty modes beyond normal difficulty, so you might get some added challenge and replay value out of beating it on every difficulty, but that's not the life that I pursue with my games. That's pretty much everything that I had to mention as far as the gameplay is concerned, but there's a few aspects to the design of the game that did get my attention throughout my playthrough. The first of these was the visuals. You can probably tell from my gameplay here that God of War Chains of Olympus looks really good for an 18-year-old PSP title. This is indeed very true, and I'm sure it was incredibly impressive to play back in its day, but I will be honest that the footage here is upscaled to 4K, just don't ask me how. Turns out that when you take a well-made PSP title and bump up the resolution a ton, it looks quite a lot like an early PS2 title. The graphical detail was immediately noticeable to me, and not just in the immediate playing ground but in some of the backgrounds too. I truly have no idea how this game was able to run with any kind of decent performance on a PSP. Overall, it does have a slightly lower amount of detail in textures and amount of objects in the area, but it still looks great and the art style is very clean. The second biggest thing that I noticed was in relation to the level design. This does feel like a God of War game through and through, but you definitely feel a smaller scale when it comes to the size of the areas and the amount of paths and areas for exploration. Exploration is not gone from this game, but side paths are minimal, and each area you go through across your journey feels maybe half to 2/3 the size of the areas played in the first 2 titles. I actually didn't find this to be disappointing though. Obviously it's a large part of the game having a much shorter runtime, but I never felt like the feel and vibe of God of War was lost or compromised by having smaller and shorter levels. The art design when it comes to both the levels and enemies is still top notch here. Despite the short game length, you still have a multitude of different areas, each with totally distinct visual designs, to still give each the full God of War treatment. From the war-torn city of Attica, to the hazy city of Marathon, down to the depths of the underworld. There's a lot more enemy variety here than I expected too, and not all copy-pasted from previous games. You've got replacements for your essential enemy archetypes the series has, but I never felt bored of fighting any particular kind of enemy because the game actually had quite good variety, and different enemies do still fight very differently. You've still got quite a few boss battles here too, and they're as fun as ever. The music is also another highlight of the game, with a full soundtrack of its own to show off. A lot of handheld spin-off games only feature a few tracks since the budget isn't quite there, considering a lot of handheld games are played with the volume turned down, but Chains of Olympus here has a full soundtrack of both new and returning tracks from previous games. The new tracks do a good job of feeling like they fit in with the vibe of this game in particular, and definitely help to give this game its own separate identity. Speaking of the sound aspects, this game is also fully voice acted, and I was not disappointed with the voice acting at all. Kratos' voice actor has returned from the first two games, and he puts just as much effort in here as he did in those titles, which is great to hear. One thing that did actually catch me off guard during my playthrough was that some of the transitions between major areas in the game can feel quite a bit jarring, like they're missing some context. I had to load up a video of all the cutscenes in the game because I felt like my game had accidentally skipped a cutscene or two near the end of the game when I went from one area to the next, and the areas were wildly different without much explanation. Call me daft if you want, but I just felt like maybe it could have used a little more budget in cutscenes to explain the transitions between areas a little better. Now that we've discussed all the aspects of the game, it's time to move on to the verdict. But before we do, if you've enjoyed this review so far, go ahead and click that subscribe button for me. I post several game reviews a month and it'd be great to have you there. Like I mentioned earlier, I also stream my game playthroughs on my Twitch channel, so if you want to hang out with myself in the chat, you're more than welcome. And all my playthroughs are uploaded here on my second channel, called St. Corvus Plays, so if you want to watch the playthrough that led to this review, then feel free to. Enough of the sales pitch, let's move on to the conclusion. God of War Chains of Olympus does a great job of taking the elements that make this series great to a handheld world, but I can't say that it exceeds its mainline titles in any particular category. I can see why this was one of the most popular PSP titles ever, with its fluid movement and combat, fun story, great level design, classic God of War soundtrack, and sheer sense of scale for a PSP game. I can't help but feel like I missed out on a hell of an experience from the late 2000s. I have to be somewhat objective here and rate this as an entry in the God of War series while giving props to the fact that it was a handheld title made by a different development studio, and make sure to factor both of those things into its score. While the game does have a very short runtime, too low of a challenge level, and much smaller environments and exploration compared to previous games, it does very well with pretty much every other aspect of it as a game, but just does not excel in any field or raise any bars outside of how technically impressive it is. I'm not sure whether or not it had any performance issues on its native hardware since I haven't had that experience, but if it did, please leave a comment below. I feel like I have to be somewhat fair here and give a good score, but not an overwhelmingly good score since this game did not really do anything to blow me away. As such, I'll be giving God of War Chains of Olympus a score of 7.5 out of 10. I'm glad that this game exists to flesh out more of the history and the world of the God of War series, but unless you are a hardcore fan of the series or just really love playing action games, I would not say that this is a must play, and if you do want to play through only the essential titles in the series, then I'd say that you're pretty safe to skip this one, even if I do hate skipping titles in the series. Since it's so short, you may as well just play it anyway, but if you don't, you won't be missing anything vital to the story. That's going to be all for the review. If you've made it this far, then thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.